growing up in America, there's probably one thing that I know to be true for sure, is that we have a lot of choices. Like, I can think just from when I was born to today, I'm not even going to go back to where, like, even older, like my parents, grandparents, back that way. But, like, I know that my choices have increased. Like I can go to Aldi. I can walk to the front left-hand side of their store and have any choice of Bluebell ice cream that I want. And I'm the kind of person that, and Morgan could probably vouch for it, I tend to get a different one every time. Man, that one, that's new. Let me try that one. Oh, let me try this, whatever. But there's some people, I bet, and you can raise your hand, that you get the same flavor almost every time. My man Avery said yes, absolutely. Morgan used to, now she doesn't. Now, it used to be cookies and cream, and now she got the oatmeal cookie one, you got cookies and cream. We get some different flavors. I like it. I like choices. Or maybe like if you go on vacation, you got a world of choices, right? You can go anywhere you want. Choices of jobs. We don't just all live on a farm and 90% of us take care of farms anymore, right? We have a plethora of jobs, a plethora of food, favorite candies. We have options, is what I'm saying. But if you're like me, and I don't know if your personality is like mine, but I actually prefer it when somebody limits how many choices I have to decide between. Anybody else? Like I don't want a buffet of choices. Like, give me like 3 or 4, and then let me pick from there. That's much more helpful for me. Like, I don't want to look at this. I get like paralysis, like if I have all these thousands of options and choices I have to make in this moment. Like, give me 3 or 4, and I'm good. And you know something? As Jesus brings the Sermon on the Mount to a close right now, what he's doing is he's going to do just that. Rather than having to decide between all these options, right? What do you mean, seek the kingdom? What do you mean by the good life, the flourishing life? What Jesus is going to do is he's going to give you 2 options. He's going to give you 2 directions. And what you pick has eternal impact. There's no fence. There's this way or this way. Because at the heart of what Jesus is going to talk to us about today is this, is that your direction determines your destination. Your direction, which direction you go, determines your destination, right? I can set out for Sam's Club in Chesapeake, and if I get on 17 South, I will never get to Sam's Club in Chesapeake. It will never happen. I will end up in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, before I ever get to Sam's Club in Chesapeake. Because the direction that I'm heading determines my destination. So as Jesus approaches this moment, there are some things that we must do and must realize from these verses. And let's start with verses 13 and 14, is that we must make a choice of which direction we will follow. Jesus is at that point in his sermon. He's like, I have laid out the kingdom. I have let you know really how high the bar is. But I prefaced everything with, this is the way that it's going to come about in your heart. Go back to Matthew 5, 3 through 12 and the Beatitudes, like where we realize our spiritual bankruptness. We realize that we then mourn that sin and mourn our inability. We see ourselves low and we realize there's nothing we can do about it. There's a chasm between us and God. And then we humbly approach him because he's made a way for us to be in right relationship with him. And in that humility becomes this stirring in our heart to hunger and thirst for righteousness, to hunger and thirst to be more like the Creator that made us in his own image. And it's then there that our motivations become from a pure heart, that we become merciful to those who were like us. We are peacemakers, and we're able to endure the persecution that comes to those who profess the name and way of Jesus. So he's told us, we're at the point where you have to make a choice. Let's pick it up in verse 3. It says, enter through the narrow gate. You actually have to enter. We could talk about, man, is this at the beginning of my road? Is this when we get into heaven? We could talk about that, but the point is you have to enter. You have to make a choice. And the only way really into the kingdom to begin with is to place your faith in Jesus. It's to actually believe he came and did what he said he was going to do. He was who he was. He did what he said he would do. He doesn't leave room for us to say, well, he's a great teacher, because he claimed to be God. So he's either a lunatic or Lord. That's another choice he doesn't give us to make. He says it's this or this. It's not middle of the road. Good teacher won't satisfy the category. So we have to make a choice. We actually have to choose to enter this way. We have to say, I'm going to follow you. I'm going to deny myself, pick up my cross daily, and follow you. And then he brings us to this narrow gate. If you got the KJV, it says straight gate. So automatically we have to go, well, what does he mean by narrow? How narrow, he says it again, is the gate, and difficult the road which leads to life. That word narrow, stenos. I got to thinking, I was like, oh, that kind of reminds me of, nerd with me for a second. I'm healthcare, great. Stenotic veins. Have you ever heard that term? If you have a cardiology issue, you've heard that term, stenosis. It happens in your joints, it happens in your arteries, or your veins. It's where the artery actually gets smaller because of plaque and whatnot on the inside. I actually have a picture of it right here. So this is what it looks like, right? So from this normal vessel, all of a sudden everything gets pinched down tight to where the blood actually, it's harder for it to get through the space. So you see when he says narrow, he's talking about this narrowing. When he says difficult, he's not talking about this physical exertion hard that I tend to read into the passage. It actually means pressed down around. What it kind of gives you the image of is if you've ever tried to squeeze through a tight spot. You can't go through with a backpack. You can't, man, I got to take my wallet out because it's I've got to get all the baggage off in order to get through this narrow way. There's this stripping down of us that must happen if we're going to follow Jesus. It's a narrow road. He prescribes a way of life, a moral compass, if you will, that informs the character of his people. The path of life, the path of following Jesus has a specific character and manner of life. Its morals and values are given by our Creator. That's the narrow way, the narrow road. And he contrasts it, right? He contrasts it with this wide gate, this wide road. That word meaning open and spacious. I get this picture of I-40/85 coming around Greensboro. If you've ever been there, there's 8 to 10 lanes of wide open space. Pick your lane. If you got road rage, you're saying stay out of the left lane so I can speed by you and keep moving, right? There's people like that, I know. But here's the thing. That's the kind of road, this open, wide, spacious. There's a lot of latitude in how you travel. You got some people slow, some people fast, some people in between. You got that motorcyclist that's like in and out. This anything goes, morally and spiritually open. All paths lead to the same place, to the same God. That's what our culture wants us to believe. No matter what you believe, we'll eventually end up. It reminded me of this picture, right? You ever heard this story of the man and the elephant? Right? You never heard this? Oh man, it's great. They say this a lot about religion, right? That all religions kind of lead to the same place. So us Christians, man, we're grabbing hold to the tusk going, oh, it's a spear. Yeah. Buddhists may say, no, we got its ears, it's a fan. Hindu, no, it's like a snake, talking about its trunk. Maybe atheists over here don't, it's a wall. Big solid body. Muslims, maybe it's a rope. Grabbing its leg, it's a tree. All the while, it's an elephant. We see it's an elephant, right? But you know what happens when everything's relative? Because that's the point, is that truth is basically, it's only on your perspective. It's only based on your perspective. But here's the thing. How did you know that's an elephant? To inform everybody else that it's an elephant? Because you have the whole picture. And what Jesus is doing is going, the narrow way is the whole picture. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the light. In a culture with a multitude of roads, Jesus says there is one way. It's an elephant. There's one way. There's one truth. And culture will push back. They'll call you what? Narrow-minded, bigoted, oppressive at times, depending on how you're using it, hateful. And you know, if we're practicing love like Jesus did, then yes, there is a narrowness to our view, but it's because this is the path of life. This is the path we're meant to walk. This isn't a one-time choice, though. So to enter into this gate, to enter into the way, right? Since it's actually a daily choice, then this, our second point, is that we must be wise in what we allow to influence our choices. Verse 15 is going to say it like this. We'll go through 20. It says, be on your guard. Circle it. Be on your guard. Constant. This is an imperative. It's an action. You have to constantly be doing this. Be on your guard against who? False prophets. People, and this is how I'm going to define prophets, right? Is people who in the Old Testament, like, they spoke for God, right? They were like, we read a couple weeks ago how Nathan came to David and called him out on his sin. He said, hey, there's this. That's you. And then because he knew, David thought he had hid everything. He's like, no, God's got it. You did not hide anything, right? So people that come and speak, they're foretelling and foretelling. A lot of times attached to prophets, or they know what's going to happen in the future. Read through Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, like they're prophesying, Daniel, prophesying of things to come, and they were right. There ain't no wrong in a true prophet. Because there was, I believe it's in Deuteronomy, where they give you the test. If the prophet is ever wrong, then it's a false prophet. Talk about weight. If they ever mess up, then you can't trust them. And they actually should be hung, I believe is how they're supposed to die. Like, that's the seriousness of it. So there are people, and today we still have this around. Whether you believe spiritual gifts are still alive or not, there's still false prophets. There's still people who claim to speak for God, but in reality, they're living and their only interest is a self-interest, a kingdom mind. Their outward appearance, we see it right here in verse 15. Who come to you in what? Sheep's clothing. They look the part of a disciple on the outside. Maybe even have a shepherd's clothing on to lead you in a direction. But if you were to pull back the layers, what you would see are ravaging wolves, bent on destruction. And I don't know if that's you, but as you read this, you're like, man, how am I supposed to know what this looks like? Right? Because let's be honest. This seems to imply we have to actually get close enough to understand that they're not who they say they are. And this isn't in my notes, but I just want to, it came on my mind this morning. I think we need to that tells me that if we're looking to people outside the local church that we'll never come in contact with and we're giving all of our trust to them, but we can't do what Jesus is going to tell us to do and inspect the fruit, we're putting our weight in a sketchy basket. Let's just be honest. Because you can't know somebody's heart who you've never met. He says it in verse 16, you'll recognize them. That word recognize, right? It's in 16 to 20. It gives us this little, what they call an inclusio, right? Recognize. Smashed in the middle is what we need to be able to recognize. That's 16 and that's 20. All right, so recognize, we need to remember. And that word recognize is going to mean it's this clearly and distinctly discerning something about it, right? I discern something clearly and distinctly, but here's the catch. It makes necessary a reaction. I go back to Matthew 7, 1 through 6, where we're actually called to exercise sound judgment from a place of grace. Remember that? We actually are to make a wise call in this moment, to understand what's good and what's bad. This way or this way, narrow or wide. He's going to lead us in that direction. We have to be able to recognize that. You'll recognize them by what? Their fruit. Fruit trees produce fruit. Anybody seen an apple come from a pine tree lately? I've been hit on the head by a pine cone, but not by an apple, right? Or have you seen did your rose bush with all its thorns ever produce an orange? Strawberry? Raspberry? No. Because that would be absurd, right? Fruit trees produce fruit. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Right? Then the answer is obviously no. We expect fruit trees to produce fruit. And there's some symbolism ties in here because in the Old Testament, even Israel is compared to being grapes and being figs. And the purpose, right, was that if somebody came up to the children of Israel, they should really get a taste of what God was like. They shouldn't come to a grapevine and get rotten grapes. They shouldn't come to a fig tree like Jesus did and find no figs, just a lot of leaves. They look the part, but they're not it. You'll recognize them by their fruit. A fruit inspector's job today is to ensure that fruits and vegetables meet a specific quality and safety standard. Right? This involves inspecting produce for defects, size, shape, and maturity, as well as checking for compliance with regulations and standards related to storage and transportation. They also monitor the conditions of produce during processes, storage, and transportation. The whole process. The fruit inspector is in it. You know what that is? They know what they're looking for, and we trust them. We trust them to look at our oranges as they come through the checkpoint in Florida into Georgia. I trusted Peter last week to pick up peaches in Georgia and bring them back, that he would know what a good peach is and what is not, what is a rotten peach. Like, they're fruit inspectors. And each of us is called to be it. So then we have to ask the logical question, if we'll recognize them by their fruit, and it says 17, right? The same way, every good tree produces good fruit, every bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree cannot produce bad fruit, and neither can a bad tree produce good fruit, verse 18. Right? In case you missed it, he just wanted to make sure you knew he was talking about fruit. So let's talk about it for a second. Because if you're like me, you ask the question, well, what qualifies good fruit? Logical question, right? Jesus gave us the answer at the beginning for part of it. In the Beatitudes. The fruit that you're looking for in somebody's life, before it's outward, it starts inward. Spiritual they're spiritually bankrupt, right? They understand their place. I'm going to flip back so I can just read it. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the humble. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. That's the fruit. And if that list wasn't enough, let's go over to Galatians 5 in just a second. All the way over to Galatians 5. A couple slides down, we'll be good. Galatians 5 says this. I'm going to flip because I can get there. Galatians 5 says this. For the flesh desires what is against the spirit, and the spirit desires what is against the flesh. These are opposed to each other so that you don't do what you want. But if you're led by the Spirit, you're not under the law. Verse 18. Verse 19. Now the works of the flesh are obvious. Sexual immorality, moral impurity, promiscuity. We don't see that in religious leaders of today at all, right? That hasn't popped up recently or continuously. Right? Idolatry. Looking out for those. Remember, Jesus already talked about it. Don't seek the worldly things. Don't put them in the place of, if I have this, then I'm fulfilled. You can't serve God and money, mammon. Sorcery, yeah, we would check. Yeah, that's definite. Don't people that practice sorcery, yeah, we get that. Hatreds. Now he's bringing us strife, sowing discord, jealousy even. Oh, their ministry's bigger than, or man, their platform is this, or man, look how much they're doing. Why can't we? Jealousies, outbursts of anger, selfish ambitions, dissensions, factions, envy, drunkenness, carousing, and if you missed it, anything similar. We're just going to catch everything in that. Anything. Anything means that. There we go. All right. Anything, right? I warned you about these things as I warned you before, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. And what Jesus is getting ready to tell us that false prophets aren't inheriting the kingdom of God because they're in this group. But what are we looking for then? It says this right here. But the fruit of the Spirit is, and we all know this, right? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. The law is not against such things. So we're looking for this thing. We're looking for these. But notice what is not listed real quick, because we're going to come to it in the next part. And it struck me this week when I looked at this. You know what's not listed? Miracles, signs, wonders. The outward displays. And we'll visit that in a second. But that just caught my mind. The fact that people, these false prophets could be doing miracles. If you go to Revelation, they're actually going to be doing some crazy things. I'm just going to leave it at that. If you haven't read Revelation, go read it. It'll blow your mind. They're going to do some things that seem like only God can do it, and they're doing it by a demonic power. So miracles, casting out demons, healing, stuff like that, that's not the main signs we're looking for. We're looking for a character that reflects the Christ that they follow. How do we do this? We have to understand what we're looking for, like the fruit inspector, right? So using big words, or not big words really, but doctrine matters. What you believe about who God is, who Jesus is, the Holy Spirit, the Bible, salvation, like these main pillars, you have to know what you believe and why you believe it and be able to defend it. Because if you don't know what you're looking for, how can you ever inspect the fruit of somebody claiming to speak for God? And this is where, as a church, why family groups are so important, why Sunday mornings are important, why things that we'll grow into in the months and years to come of being able to educate members on doctrine and things of the faith. Like, why that matters is because you speak to yourself more than anybody else. You preach to your own heart more than anybody else ever will. So you need to know what you're looking for. You need to curate what comes in to your house, what comes in to your ears, what comes in to your heart. Because if you're not curating it, you're making what Paul would say is ample room. Ample room. And then we must know what we're looking for lifestyle-wise. What does the narrow way look like? The narrow way would have been a catch term, right, for the moral guidelines of the Old Testament and the moral teaching of Jesus. So what did Jesus prescribe as the way of life? Are we familiar with that? That's why we've been going through the Sermon on the Mount, is to try to catch what Jesus wants us to do with those angry thoughts, to catch what he wants to do with our draw towards sexual immorality and things like that, with our draw towards lying, simple things, being true to our word, our draws towards loving those who hate us, not just those who love us and can return it. What we do with our money, that's why Jesus is interested with what we're seeking. Is because he wants that fruit to go down deep. This is why the local church is so important. You can't do it unless you're part of a body of believers walking the narrow road together. You can't do this road on your own. It was never meant to be like that. So if you only show up on Sundays, if you're only showing up on Thursdays, if you're only just listening and leaving, like there's this moment where we get around each other and we serve and we do and we grow and we reach, and that's where life on life begins to shape the body of Christ into his image. It's where actually our faults come on display. And that's scary. Let's be honest. Nobody likes to be seen as broken. But you know what happens? If your brokenness never comes out, how can it ever be addressed? Because it's a blind spot for a reason. Like if I've got dirt on my back, I can't see it. Unless my man Peter goes, hey, Andrew, look, come here a second. You know you got dirt on your back. Like you got a big old stain. How about we do something about that? We need others. And so we make a choice, right? We're wise about our influences, right? And our third point, our final point is this, is that our choices indicate our destination. Because think about it. Your choices come from where? They come from your heart. So our choices of how we're living, our choices of what we're doing indicate what we really believe in. So in the end game, our why is going to determine how we act. And how we act leads us in a direction. Our direction ends in a destination. Right? This is like one of the scariest passages in Scripture, if we're honest with each other. Right? Because he goes, and nobody wants to find themselves in this position where it says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only those who does the will of my Father. Like, think about it. Yes, we have a security of our salvation in Jesus. But it's seen in the motives of our heart, not just recognizing Jesus as Lord. I know I'm stepping on this like little space right here, but let me explain a little bit. Let me explain, because this is Jesus speaking. Like, don't argue with me, argue with him when he says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord. Lord, Lord is used twice, right? So it's this idea of, I do know Jesus is King and Father. I know he's these things. I know he's in authority. He has all authority. He has all power. I acknowledge that. But what I see in this, does the will of my Father, I don't want to draw us into works-based faith, but works are important. Because we just saw, you'll know them by their fruits. Right? So it's when I say, Lord, Lord, and recognize the grace that's been extended to me in Jesus, that then transforms how I live my life. There are so many people sitting in churches today that I fear are going to get to the gate and he's going to say, depart from me, I never knew you. Because they're depending on their fire insurance and their religious activity to save them. Like, I showed up when the doors were opened. Jesus, I read my Bible every day. Jesus, I kept the kids. I sang in the choir. I did this. And it applies outside the church too. God, I was a good person. I fed the poor. I did this. I served. I gave. You hear the central theme? I. It was never about us to begin with. Like, our job is to live out the will of God as the ambassadors of the kingdom we will one day enter, right? So an ambassador is somebody who is a representative of somebody else. To do the will of the Father, right? To do the will of the Father is what he says. And we want to read it like it's God's personal will for my life, right? What does God have planned for me? When in reality, his will is to look like him in everything we do. Because you know what happens? We talked about it on Thursday night, right? What do we do in the waiting? We look like that, where we're seeking, we're asking, we're trusting, we're stepping into what God's already revealed. He's already showed us that we're supposed to be reaching into this community, evangelizing. We're supposed to be like loving as Jesus would love. We're supposed to be speaking the truth. Like, we're supposed to be doing all these things already. So in the middle of this, we're ambassadors of the kingdom, because we know one day, if nothing ever happens here, I know one day I'll be there. Because of grace, not because of what I did. But his grace has transformed my heart into something that moves. It's his moral will expressed. There is this character of obedience to the expressed will of God that defines the true believer. We don't obey to get God's favor. Because God favored us in Jesus with his grace, we obey. Did you catch the difference? I'm not trying to get the attention of my Father with my obedience. Hey, look at me, I did it right. Ashby, I pee-peed, I stayed dry, can I get candy now? Right? I did it because I know he has what's best for me, and I'm going to trust him. Then we hear it, we'll move quickly, we're running out of time. It says this, it says that I'm all the way over in Galatians. Let me get back. It says, on that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name, drive out demons in your name, and do many miracles in your name? Right? The stupendous, these things that we're going, whoa, only God can do these things. But these are the things that people are doing that God says, depart from me. So we can't just trust the fact that you had a word, that things miraculously changed. We actually have to come in and expect the fruit. And what I want to say in this moment is that motive for that matters. And before we even get into that, what do we do about it? Like, we have to actually inspect the own fruit of our life. Back to Matthew 7, 1-6. We actually have to look at our fruit. If I don't want to find myself in this camp, the best thing I can do is not look at the world and try to prove myself as good. I actually have to look at the fruit of my life and go, do I look like Jesus? Do the pursuits of my heart indicate that I'm following Jesus and the narrow way? If I want to end up at the narrow gate, I've got to find the narrow way. And Jesus has made it abundantly clear what the narrow way looks like. Make a choice. Be wise about our choices and the whys behind them and the direction they lead. Your direction determines your destination, right? We'll close with a story. In March 22nd of 2016, I don't know if you remember over in Europe, but there was a bombing at the Brussels airport. Does this ring a bell for anybody? If you travel, we were a few months away from going to Uganda, and one of our flight options actually went through Brussels. So I was like, we're probably not going to go that way. We're going to go through Amsterdam instead and go kind of our usual route. But Mason Wells, a 19-year-old American missionary from Utah, was at the airport at that time, like during the early morning hours of March 22nd. So him and some companions, they're walking through the airport. They see a sign and realize they're going the wrong direction. They're in the wrong place, wrong terminal. And they turn around and go the other way. Just moments later, where they would have been standing, blew up. And instead of being in that, their lives were spared. They got hit by a second blast, but they had injuries. They didn't die. They got hurt on the way, but the direction change saved their life. And what Jesus wants for everybody in here today is for you to check the direction that you're headed. Every day. I'm checking to make sure I'm walking where I should.